somebody was murdered over in Italy. And
did you know Frank von Overbeck was in the Civil War?
they came and kidnapped her.
Yeah.
And they took her away.
The Martin mystery. Who was murdered? Who was kidnapped? Who fought in the Civil War? I'm Andrew Gebauer. Mystery and lore surrounds the history of my family, which came from a variety of different places. I have ancestry from many different European countries, including France, Belgium, Germany, Italy, and Luxembourg. The Martin mystery begins with my great-great-great-great-grandparents, David and Rebecca Boffman, who were born in 1817 and 1816 respectively. Their daughter, Margaret Boffman, married Frank von Overbeck in 1862. That is where the mystery begins. Now you're probably wondering why I'm holding this rosewood cane. Well, the truth is, I discovered it while performing research on my family history. It belonged to my great-great-great-grandfather, Frank von Overbeck, and is over 100 years old. Prior to this research, the only thing we really knew about Frank von Overbeck was that he was born in Belgium in 1837, and that his daughter, Veronica, married my great-great-grandfather, George Applin Martin. Well, I discovered Frank's historic past through my research. I discovered that in 1861, Frank von Overbeck was a Union soldier in the Civil War. Frank was a private in Company K of the Pennsylvania 8th Infantry Regiment. Now, Frank only served about 3 months because his company suffered such a large casualty rate that they disbanded it in July. Nonetheless, since I have a significant interest in the Civil War, this was an amazing discovery, and one that my relatives knew absolutely nothing about. Why did this remain a mystery? This is a significant finding. It is not 100% certain that my great-great-great-grandfather fought in the Civil War, but the mystery leans that way. More interesting stories and conspiracies have surrounded my ancestors. Frank von Overbeck and his wife, Margaret Boffman, had a daughter named Veronica. Veronica married George Applin Martin, my great-great-grandfather. While we know who Veronica's parents are, the parents of George Applin Martin remain unknown. Here is George and Veronica's grandson and my grandfather, Daniel Martin, talking about the situation.
There was a woman living out in the woods, and woodcutters with two brothers. Somehow or another she got pregnant from someone. And that's all I know, that's it.
The story remains interesting and up in the air. Was repulsive immorality to blame? Or was there a couple who abandoned their young son at birth? Despite not knowing who his parents were, George A. Martin married Veronica Overbeck, and they had multiple children. Their son, George Franklin Martin, married Agnes Vogt, who had my grandfather Daniel in 1929. Agnes Vogt was the daughter of Frank Albert Vogt and Matilda Ann Vogt. Agnes was motherless from a young age, losing her mother when she was just 9 years old. Diving further into Agnes's family, I made a gruesome discovery that no one knew about. I came upon a death certificate dated from 1917. The cause of death on the certificate said the following: suicide, cut throat with razor while insane. I then looked at the name, Augustus Frank Vogt. Was he related to Frank Albert Vogt? Was this a suicide that was kept secret? Upon reading the name, I became peculiar. He died in Emporium, Pennsylvania, very close to where his supposed brother resided. I then found the name of his parents, Anthony Vogt and Catherine Kiefer. Were these the same parents as Frank Albert? I then did intensive research on Frank Albert Vogt, and finally came upon his death certificate. There I discovered the grim truth. Frank Albert Vogt and Augustus Frank Vogt were brothers. After I told my family of the discovery, they were stricken with surprise. Even my grandfather was unaware of this instance, and it was his great uncle. More mysteries, uncovered through research and dedication to family history. Even if it is sometimes gruesome, making discoveries like these does something to a predecessor, much like myself. I don't know what it is exactly. Maybe it's because it is in my bloodline, but the mystery of George Applin Martin and the mysterious suicide of Augustus Frank Vogt intrigued me like nothing else. Maybe it's because of the unawareness, but someday I want to find the truth about these people. Not only does ominous mystery surround my grandfather's ancestry, there are also mysteries from my grandmother's bloodline that are extremely intriguing. Both of my grandmother's sets of grandparents arrived in the United States from Italy. There were her paternal grandparents, Dominic and Rita D'Agostine, and her maternal grandparents, Nicola Charles Ferranti and Nicolina Cupolo. Through the interview with my grandmother, Joan Martin, I discovered fascinating details about Nicola Charles Ferranti, my great-great-grandfather. According to my grandmother, before he was married to Nicolina Cupolo, he lived in Olean, New York, under the name Edmund Franck, and worked on the railroad. She also told me that he was married for a year and a half before meeting Nicolina. Also, no one in my grandmother's family knows how Nicola arrived in the United States. However, she does know the reason. Here she is explaining why her grandfather came to the United States.
He came to this country because somebody was murdered over in Italy, and they thought that he did it, which he didn't do it, and he was so scared they snuck him out of the country. And so nobody knows how he got into this country.
A murder? Why did they think it was him? Another mystery, this time from my grandmother's side, that is enigmatic to people even to us, the members of his family. Further details and mystery surround this side of my ancestry. My grandmother went on to explain that her mother, Joan D'Agostine, had a sister, Julia, who at the age of 14 was kidnapped by the Italian mafia.
They came and kidnapped her.
Yeah.
And they took her away. And then they took her to Erie. And the guy married her, and he was like in his 30s.
The mafia in the small little town of Johnsonburg, Pennsylvania. Upon kidnapping her, she was taken to Erie, Pennsylvania, where she married a man in his 30s and she had multiple children. This was the last time that Nicolina Cupolo saw her daughter. Years later, after Julia's husband died, my grandmother, grandfather, and some of my grandma's relatives visited her in Erie. They did not know what to expect or what to find. Turns out, Julia lived in a poverty-stricken neighborhood in Erie. My grandmother did not give further details about their interaction. Just imagine the situation: getting kidnapped by the Italian mafia, taken to Erie, marrying someone that was significantly older than her, and having children, and then visiting her years later. It must have been an overwhelming experience, and one that I would not have learned without research on family history and understanding the previous mysteries of my ancestors. So you have heard all kinds of stories from the Martin, Vogt, D'Agostine, and Ferranti families. Now it is only necessary to describe the first interactions between my grandfather, Daniel Martin, and my grandmother, Joan Martin, because without them, there is no me. It all started at a petty high school party when my grandma was in high school and my grandfather was just out of school. There is when they met each other, but it was not anything formal and did not seem like it was going anywhere. About a month later, while Joan was working at Marino's restaurant, in comes Dan Martin and his friends. Joan at first did not realize who it was and didn't think much of it, but when she realized, she became a little nervous. The manager at the restaurant told her to go wait on the table where Dan was sitting. She recalls how nervous she was, and even recalls dropping a piece of pie on his lap. Now, Dan, being the kind, easygoing person that he is, was not mad or anything. Instead, he asked her on a date. Joan's father, Frank, remained skeptical of the situation. He told her that the only way she could go was if she took her sister Rita with her, and she did. And on December 28th, they went on their first date at the Armory in Kane, Pennsylvania. They proceeded to date for about a year, and then Daniel Martin proposed to Joan D'Agostine before he got deployed for the Navy. Dan was in the Navy for about 7 months, training in Indiana and getting sent to Germany. This was during the Korean War, but he was not sent there. He did not see any military action. When he returned from the service, they got married in October of that year. Over the years, they had 6 children: Mary Lynn, Daniel, Melanie, Diane, David, and Dana. In 1992, the youngest daughter, Dana, married Greg Gebauer, and that is how I came into the world. In 1968, my grandpa and grandma Martin moved into this house on 128 Mount Morency Avenue in Ridgeway, Pennsylvania. As you can tell from the photo, this is a large, Victorian-style home that was one of the first houses ever built in Ridgeway. For years, mystery and skepticism even surrounded this house. The previous owner of the house seemed a little odd, and kids before 1964 would always talk negatively about this house and create stories about this man and his lifestyle. When my grandma Martin purchased the house, my grandpa was shocked. He did not want to move into this house. He thought it was too large for them. One time, when my grandmother was cleaning out the closet in the upstairs bedroom, a handgun dropped to the floor. What was its purpose? Why would the previous owner keep this in the upstairs bedroom? The answer is unknown. I can say myself that because of the architecture and largeness of the house, it does seem a little mysterious when you are standing alone in one of the large rooms. The mystery began in 1837, and as long as that house on Mount Morency Avenue stands, then the mystery will always remain. Overbeck, Martin, Vogt, D'Agostine, Ferrani, these are all names that define who I am. They are a legacy, an honor, and a mystery. Without these people, no matter how mysterious their lives were, there is no mystery, and there is no me.